In this video, we're going to talk about the rule of a linear function. A rule is a standard to follow in order to get a desired outcome. That's just the general definition of a rule. Well, in terms of math, a rule is an equation that one follows for the input, remember that's x, that gives you the output, remember that's y. So we have a couple examples here of rules, right? We have an equation. Okay, so we're going to put some input values for x, and we're going to solve for y and see what the output would be. Okay, so let's just use -2, -1, 0, 1, and 2. Okay, so if I plug in, or if I substitute -2 here in for x, then I would do -3 times -2, which is 6. 6 plus 2 is 8. -3 times -1 is 3, plus 2 is 5. -3 times 0 would just be 0, plus 2 would be 2. -3 times 1 would be -3. -3 plus 2 would give me -1. -3 times 2 would be -6. -6 plus 2 would give me -4. So that's just the rule that I would follow for that equation, y equals -3x plus 2. Okay, if I look over here, this is actually called function notation. The next video will be about function notation. This we would read as the f of x, or the function of x, equals x squared minus 9. So once again, let's use -2, -1, 0, 1, and 2. And all we're going to do is plug these values in for x and solve. So if I have -2 squared, well, that negative times a negative, that's going to give me a positive, right? So that would be 4. -2 times -2 is 4. 4 minus 9 gives me -5. Okay, -1 squared would be 1. 1 minus 9, -8. 0 squared is 0. 0 minus 9, -9. 1 squared, also 1. 1 minus 9 gives me -8. 2 squared, 4. 4 minus 9, -5. So there's my rules, there's my values. When I plugged in these values for x, I got these values for y. And notice this would be a function, okay? F of x is like y, right? This is x, this is y. Well, -5 repeated and -8 repeated, but that was my output. It's okay if my outputs repeat. The only thing that can't repeat is my input. Okay, so let's look down here at some types of functions that we need to be able to identify. Okay, the first is called linear. We've talked about that. That's slope-intercept form. The way to recognize a linear equation or a linear function is the highest exponent of the variables is 1, or there would be no exponent shown, right? So just y equals 4x plus 8. That would be the linear equation, y equals mx plus b. The second is quadratic. Quadratic has an exponent of 2 on the variable. So it could be y equals 3x squared minus 7. So x could be squared, or y could be squared. Okay, the next one is called reciprocal. Reciprocal is when the variable x would be in the denominator. So the equation would look something like this. Y equals 1 over x. The next one says exponential. An exponential function is where a number is raised to a variable exponent. So if you notice here, 4 is my base number, and actually x is my exponent. Okay, so that would be an exponential function. There's actually one more that I want to talk to us about, and let's call it number 5, and this is called a cubic function. Okay, so think about what exponent I would use if I cubed a number. It'd be an exponent of 3, right? So cubic exponent, or cubic function, would have highest exponent would be a 3. Okay, so that's another function, cubic function. All right, so all we're going to do is look at how to write the rule of a linear function. Okay, so we need to be able to identify some of those other functions, quadratic, cubic, reciprocal, and exponential, just based off of what the equation looks like. But we're not going to have to actually write a rule from a graph or from a table. But for linear functions, we are, because we write that in slope-intercept form. Okay, so the first one we're going to do is over here on the left. It says find the rule or the equation from a graph. Okay, so there's really a two-step process here, and then step 3 is actually writing our rule. So step 1 says find the slope. Remember, slope is m, and since we have a graph, we're going to use rise over run. Step 2 says find b. B is the y-intercept, where the graph crosses the y-axis. So once I have m and I have b, all I do is I take the values I get for m and b and I plug them in my equation, and that's my rule. So let's start here by finding slope, rise over run. Okay, so here's my y-axis, here's my x-axis, and this red line is actually my function, or my line that's going through my graph. Okay, so I look here and let's do rise over run. So if I start at this point, I'm going to go up 1, left 1, 2, 3, 4. So if I go up and left, I would say my slope is negative 1/4. Remember, I can check that because my line's going downhill, so my slope should be negative. Okay, and the last thing I'm going to do is find my y-intercept. It's going through negative 1, so b would be negative 1. All right, and then I take those two pieces of information, I plug them in, and I say that my rule is y equals negative 1/4 x minus 1. That's my rule. Okay, over here, we're going to find the rule from a table. So I still have to find the same two things, right? I have to find m and I have to find b. Well, if I don't have a graph, now instead of using rise over run, I'm going to use a slope formula, right? M equals y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. Once I find m, I plug that in my equation. But now to find b, I'll have to pick any of these ordered pairs, and I substitute the value for x into x in my y equals mx plus b, and the value for y in the equation, and I would solve for b. Okay, so let's take a look at that. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to solve for m. So let's say m equals y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. Okay, so right here I can pick any two of these points I want. Well, I'm probably not going to choose that point just so I don't have to work with a negative. If you like working with negatives, you can choose that if you want. Okay, I'm going to choose this point and this point. Okay, I could have chosen any two I wanted. So let's call this x1, y1 and x2, y2. Okay, so I have m equals 15 minus 9 over 5 minus 2. Right, so now I just simplify. 15 minus 9 is 6, 5 minus 2 is 3. So I have my slope of 2. So now I take that, and my equation now says y equals 2x plus b. Okay, so now I have to find the y-intercept. So to do that, I have to pick any ordered pair that I want, and I substitute that in for x and y, and I solve for b. Okay, so let's go down here and look. All right, I can use one of these 2 points that I've already used for slope formula. I could use this one, or this one. It doesn't matter. I'm going to go ahead and use the point 8, 21. So be careful here. X is 8 and y is 21. So I'm going to plug in 21 equals 2 times 8 plus b. Now I just solve that. 2 times 8 is 16. So I have 21 equals 16 plus b. Now, in order to get b by itself, I have to subtract 16 from both sides. Those 16s cancel. 21 minus 16 is 5. So now my equation reads 5 equals b. So all I do now, just like I did on the graph, I take m and I plug it in for, or I take 2 and I plug it in for m, like up here. But now I take 5 and I plug it in for b. So my final equation, my rule, would be y equals 2x plus 5. That would be the rule of this linear function from the table.